Welcome to the Privateer podcast. Today we have a special friend of mine, Rob Rose, financial editor, award-winning journalist, and author. So Rob, pleasure to have you with us today.
Oliver, great to be here, man. It's going to be good.
So journalism, how did you get into journalism in the first place?
Well, I studied law at Wits. I did a BA first, and I kind of did a bit of writing then for like SL magazine and stuff like that. And I kind of really enjoyed it. And then, I worked at Engineering News, sort of in the middle at some point. And then when I finished the law degree, I did articles for all of 2 weeks and decided this was just not for me. And so I called those guys. I said to the law firm, like, I can't make it into the office today. I just couldn't face it. And they said, no worries. I put the phone down. And I was like, what does that mean? And suddenly there was a car outside my house hooting, like, we're here to fetch you. And I just hid behind the curtains and never went out and realized I just had a long sense that the legal industry is very hierarchical. It takes a long time to do anything. And I always thought journalism, you can do more quicker. You can make an influence quicker on things. And that's what I've enjoyed, is you write something, you put it out there, and often it has an impact. You know, we've seen now in the last couple of weeks the stories about the Gauteng Pension Administration Agency that had a fake R1 billion contract, lease contract. And because of the stories and the exposure in the media, the guy who runs it gets suspended, and there's now an investigation into it. So that kind of thing it's kind of satisfying to see what you do has a national impact. And I think a lot of careers you have a sense of you working towards something, but nobody sees what you do. The job satisfaction in journalism is immense. You know, it's so egotistical. You do something, you publish it for the whole world to see, like, look at what I've done today. I mean, how many other careers do that?
Sure.
So I think the job satisfaction is pretty high, even though it's a crumbling industry.
Crumbling industry. So what's your view on the state of sort of financial journalism in South Africa at the moment, maybe even globally?
Well, I think journalism is in a tough space because primarily for decades really, it relied on advertising sales, and then people bought the editions of printed press. But that's diminished because the internet has scotched that whole thing. So now people don't expect to pay for content, and I think the advertising model has become more diffuse. I mean, advertising gets split amongst more direct routes all over the place and on the internet. So I think it's harder to sustain the financial model, and the consequence of that is that I think a lot of the media houses don't have the resources to do the job particularly well. So you have some of the South African press just writing stuff that is completely without context, without value, reciting yesterday's press conference. I mean, what's the point of that? I think that kind of model will get killed by AI. So you have to do, it's like any profession, you have to add value to people who buy you, who invest their time in you. And I think a lot of the media houses are just trading on borrowed time. They're just, recanting yesterday's news without much distillation at all, so that there can't be a model in that. So I think that globally people want news, but they want intelligence. They don't want information. And we're in the most information-rich society, but intelligence thin. I think that if you could distill everything you read about every single day into short snaps that are really useful to you, or you have great utility, then it's very useful. But I think the glut of information helps nobody.
Rob, you recently made some changes in your own career. You were editor of Financial Mail for many years, and now you've ventured on your own. You've formed something new. You want to talk us through that journey? What was that all about?
No, I worked at Arena Holdings, which owned Financial Mail for a long time. I worked at Business Day. I worked at various places within that, and we saw that the cost pressures come in, and we thought that we could do better by having a more direct relationship with advertisers. You could build something better. That's our ethos at Currency, which is what we started, is pro-business. We believe in the business environment. We believe that you need to add value to people. You need to provide the intelligence. Those are the founding slogans, I suppose. And that we chose the name Currency because I think that the news should boost your personal currency. That's what it should do. People don't just want to read something that is just another man bites dog story. You want to read something that will give you skills to do better in your life. It's, to some extent, it's about self-actualization. We had a story at Financial Mail that just went completely crazy. It was about the We Buy Cars guys who went from I think the headline was from 0 to 3.7 billion in a couple of years, and it was a story of Van der Walt who started We Buy Cars, and that story just went crazy. And I think it was because people wanted to know, how can we do the same? Like, what did these guys do that allowed us to get somewhere in life, to build this massive thing? And it's a great success story, and people want the inspirational stories, not just, it's important to hold people accountable and have stories about corruption, but I think that people also want the inspirational stories and to find how to make a success of their lives. And I think that there's a place to do that. And we felt by getting a group of credible journalists together, you could do something more direct. I think the world has become a situation where the big brands are trusted less to some extent, and the individuals you trust, the people are the ones that you read. Like, I read specific journalists because I think, this guy knows what he's talking about. And I think when we started Currency, we had, we picked Julieta, Tim Cohen, Anne Crotty, people like that who people follow and say, like, well, we trust this person. I think the value lies in the specific expertise of the people rather than the big brand of the news organization. And I think that's a calculated bet on specific individual expertise. I think that's where it's going. I think in all careers, I think, this business here, people trust you. And I think that's a specific point. People follow you. And that, I think, is one of the differences now in a more information-rich world, is that you can follow specific people and you build up that level of trust.
Yeah, that's such a fantastic point. It doesn't make a difference whether it's journalism, whether it's professional services. People want to do business with people that they like, people that they trust, people that understand what their needs are.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's the gap that you're kind of filling with Currency. People saying, well, I trust what Rob Rose has to say, or I followed what Juliet has had to say on a particular matter, and I buy into that ethos.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why, you see so many companies get bought by others, and then the main people leave.
Yep.
And the idea that you can still sustain that entity with just the brand without the actual character and the personality of the individuals who formed it is a bit of a cipher. It's not really true. It's the individuals who make it, which is why you see, friends of our, like lawyers, for example, who move to another firm, their clients will go with them because they built that relationship. And I think that is what a lot of people underestimate, to some extent, the value of those personal relationships.
Yeah, I guess the challenge with a business like Currency is, how do you differentiate yourself in this little bit of a sea of sameness within the financial media, a regurgitation of yesterday's SENS announcements or what happened at the AGM, something like that, and delve a little bit deeper into it?
So in that case, we always said you're going to provide the intelligence that nobody else does, the different stories. I think rather than, like you said, yesterday's NASPERS AGM happened and 32% voted against this. What value does that add? What's the so what of that? What can I take away from that? So I think you want to pick on the bigger touch points of society. And I think a lot of the financial media that just focuses on the SENS feed is not telling you what's happening in the broader society, because we have a very small universe of listed companies. So, for example, the frustrations around how black empowerment has been implemented in this country is an on-the-ground issue that I think it needs to be ventilated, but you don't find that in a SENS feed. I think the frustration over the way municipalities are being run is something you won't find on a SENS feed or a press announcement. It's in nobody's interest to send out a press release saying, the municipality isn't working properly, thanks a lot. So that's the stuff you need to get people on the ground. You need to go and get these stories and explain society, explain, to be grandiose and, explain the economics of your world to people, not just rely on the stuff that comes to you, because your newsroom is so emaciated. You have 3 people who are dead on their feet sitting in a newsroom waiting for their email to pip at them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you made an excellent point there around getting that little bit of the extra value add within the financial journalism. Obviously, there's that adage that says, like, bad news sells. So the temptation is to go and put a whole bunch of bad news out in the financial press. How do you balance that up with, obviously, the investigative journalism is very important, exposing the corruption that exists or the malfeasance or lack of corporate governance within some of the corporates. But how do you share any of the good news stories?
Well, there's space for that. We've done a lot of work on that. So Currency, the way we set it up, it's like the news operation, which is the website, and that's how it works. We have newsletters that are going out to 100,000 people a day. We got those. But then there's the non-profit side, which is also financial literacy stuff. It's training of financial journalists and it's investigations. And I think that those are also 3 crucial points, because the reality is, and you know this from the people who come speak to you, a lot of people don't have financial knowledge. People who are executives in companies don't know the very basics of how a share scheme will work, or how even to read an income statement sometimes. And you always assume that kind of knowledge. And I think the financial press assumes everyone knows how to understand this stuff, and they don't. So I think financial literacy is an important point. So we plan to launch before the last election. We missed it by a couple of weeks. But, for example, I thought what would have been important is to go out and speak to people and have videos of, speaking to people on the streets. Like, what do you understand by the ANC's economic policy or the DA's economic policy and the EFF? I mean, why would nationalizing this work? I mean, where would the money come from? It's important to have these discussions, to challenge people, to educate people. And that's financial literacy stuff, because I think people vote in this country. We have massive economic decisions taken upon bad information. I think it's important to put stuff out there and to say that's our role as journalists, is to educate the public. Yes. And I think that's a very important part of it. So I think there are different elements to what we do. Education is definitely one of them. And I think telling the good news stories, bad news does sell, but I think the We Buy Cars story, the educational impact of that, the people want to know, how can I succeed? There are huge inspirational moments and stories like that. In India, for example, one of the things we looked at was this thing called Better India. Now, these guys it was a sponsored series, but these guys, a mobile phone company.
Yes.
But they didn't do sort of, very dull, cliched content. They went out, spoke to people like how cell phones are making a difference, how data is making a difference in people's lives, like real great stories, actual stories on the ground of companies. And that won awards in India. It wasn't sort of some cliched thing you stick to the back of it. Like, those kind of stories are the real. All of us are in this country now because we think it can still work. I mean, that's why we're still doing this, because we still believe in it, right? It's not a situation where we just hear like until it all implodes. I think that, and the way it can work is by these examples of great things that have been done. And that there is some great intellectual depth, I think, in the top of companies, and nobody speaks to them.
Yeah.
So one of the things we've done in the investment series, for example, which we run every Thursday, is interviewing people who run investment companies. Like, what are you thinking? What's your thinking? How did you get to this? What are the kind of things that keep you awake? Because it's not just like a bland, we've decided to shift to crypto. It's like we have some people who make deep decisions, who think a lot about this stuff. And the reality, the complexity behind those decisions never gets talked about. So you want to, I suppose, reveal to society the thinking behind a lot of these big corporate decisions that are made. That's so necessary and so underreported.
And are the big corporates trusting enough of South African journalists to be able to share that information with them?
Well, that's another point, is I think that a lot of them have been burnt, and I think a lot of them don't like doing that. But I think it's the value of having personal relationships.
Yes.
And I think if you, as Tim Cohen, go and speak to, the CEO of Transnet or whatever, I think if you build a personal relationship of trust, they know that they can trust you not to mangle a story and to get it right. Then I think then you are willing to tell a story. But if you think that you're going to speak to a journalist and either they will just take one line and blow it out of context, or completely mangle the whole thing, and it's not worth the risk. No. And I think that's the value of having experience in journalism. You get better stories. If you are someone at, like Polly from Wyk, just left Daily Maverick, but her, for example, when she calls you up, you will speak to someone like that. If you a lot of the guys, Peter de Toy, there's some great journalists around, but they've built up their relations with people, and I think that you learn to trust those people. But it's very difficult to form that, partly because when you start as a journalist, you don't know very much. It takes a while before you earn that trust.
Rob, you've been in this career for some time. Your journalistic career has stood up to the test of time, and during that period, you've met the good, the bad, the ugly of corporate South Africa.
I only meet the ugly when I look in the mirror, mate.
And in those interactions, you still, something that I want to touch on that you raised earlier, that you're still a South Africa optimist, you're still a Joburg optimist. Your base is very much still here. What gives you that sense of optimism?
Well, I think the sheer extent of the sophistication of the skills in this country, it's not, the obvious comparisons that people made with Zimbabwe, like, oh, South Africa's going to Zimbabwe. You see the pessimists say that a lot. But the truth is that this is a far more sophisticated economy. It's a services economy. The human resources depth is much greater. I think there's a lot. It's just a far deeper economy. I think that, and you have seen some really good reforms, and I think it does take a while for reforms to take effect, for one thing. And part of the level of frustration with the municipalities and the governments. I mean, I think Joburg, for example, I think the leadership in Joburg is the worst thing I've seen. I mean, I honestly think the painting on the wall behind you would do a better job of running a city than our leadership in this. And it's disastrous, and it's infuriating to people because you know the potential that exists in this society, and it's frustrating to see it being misspent. And I think it's because people feel so strongly about it, and because they see the potential, that they are so frustrated and so angry about it. But South Africa has been, in a kind of a stock market sense, discounted so much recently. We're trading on the world's smallest PEs because of the past decade. So in a sense, the trajectory is upward. Whereas if you look at somewhere like the States, again in the stock market perspective, the PEs are sky high because it's an expensive country. There's so much potential here, and we're at the bottom of where we could be. A few incremental changes could make a massive difference. And to talk about it here, for example, we haven't had load shedding really in any real sense for more than a year. I mean, that's fantastic. Year and a half, 2 years. I don't know what load shedding was anymore.
How quickly it's left our memories.
We don't talk about that because you tend to focus on the things that are still not working. Now you have the water crisis. But the change in getting electricity working was a massive one. And I think that we discount the small changes we make because you look at the next big disaster. And that's obviously justifiable. You see where that happens. But the potential for the reforms to make a difference in society and to asset values in this country are huge. I think Joburg is massively badly run, but you have seen a consequence of that in the electoral tables. You've seen the ANC fall from 53%, 67% in, I think, 2009 to 40% now. And that has charted the fact that a lot of the people in the country are just completely ignored. They are without jobs. 1 in 3 people don't have a job. And so it's hurt the ANC at the ballots. And that's how it should be. It needs to hurt the ANC more to some extent because there is a growing sense that they've disconnected from the reality of people in the streets. And I think that's absolutely true. But I think that there has been a consequence for the ANC.
I really love that point that you raised earlier there about Joburg has been discounted. The analogy of on the stock market, it's been discounted. Joburg is still the business hub of this country and will remain so for many, many, many years. And one of the narratives we like to push out here is that it must be one of the lowest cost destinations to run your business from, certainly on the whole of the African continent. Yeah. And the mood certainly does feel like it's changing within the Joburg environment.
It's, you get a few things right on investment, for example, and you could have a massive difference. Like you say, the cost of labor in this country is incredibly cheap. And if the globe is looking for places to place data centers, which is massive demand for data centers globally. I mean, Africa and South Africa definitely should be on the list for that.
Yes.
There are power limitations, and I think there are certain water limitations, and there are definitely resource implications. But I think in terms of looking for a place to base yourself for labor costs, it's
labor
massive.
Costs, rental costs,
absolutely,
technology, it's all here.
Exactly. You could probably buy the whole of Joburg for the cost of one data center in Washington. I mean, that's. You just have to boot out all the electoral mayors, and then it's fine.
Rob, can we talk a little bit about some of the books that you've written? You started off writing a book about Tannenbaum.
Yeah, Barry Tannenbaum. I mean, the Grand Scam, I wrote about Barry Tannenbaum, and it's a fascinating story. I mean, I think it happened it was exposed a couple of months after Bernie Madoff came out. And the similarities were amazing. I mean, this well-to-do family in Joburg, on the West Rand of Joburg, whose grandson, being Barry Tannenbaum, or he was the grandson of the founder of Adcock Ingram,
yes,
had essentially created this business in which he was telling people they were getting 120% returns every year by buying the little components of AIDS drugs, the antiretroviral drugs, and they were being sold to India. And he forged invoices from Aspen, from Glaxo, from all these big companies, and he would tell people they're getting this. And the similarities were with Madoff is that a lot of really rich people, wealthy people, smart people like Sean Summers, people like Howard Lowenthal. I mean, people who knew the markets had invested in this.
Captains of industry.
Yeah, captains of industry, and it was fascinating to see just how that all crumbled. And I suppose there's a sense of naivety sometimes, and I think that's what it captured amongst the elite of this country is that, sure, this guy comes and sells this dream to me. And it was just a complete scam. He scuppered off to Australia. He went to a place called Runaway Bay, which was, what you do, I think, when you're a global felon, go to Runaway Bay. And was last spotted a few years ago by this Australian journalist who interviewed him when he was driving an Uber. And it was a fascinating story because it spoke so much to the realities of kind of like high net worth individuals, kind of like the sense of isolation, people desire to get money offshore, and it underscored how Joburg is still pretty much a kind of a frontier investment town. People still think like the Wild West sometimes.
Still the Wild West, still a mining town at its heart.
So it was a fascinating story. I thought it's I loved writing the story. I mean, the process of writing a book is arduous. It's kind of, I'd had like a kid. I had like a toddler then, and it was crazy. Like, when the toddler woke up in the morning, I was going to go to sleep, and then I couldn't. But it was fun doing it, and I think that those kind of stories are fascinating. And then I wrote Steinhoff, the Steinheist story, and that was that
captivated the whole of the country. That was a big financial collapse, but the story captured the essence of it, and then became a TV series as well.
It was a crazy story because I think that, like, for a long time, for many years, Steinhoff had kind of captured the imagination as it's the big bet on hard currency earnings. You're going to Europe, you're going to be, I think they were the second largest furniture retailer in Europe. And so the notion was, invest in Steinhoff. They have hard currency assets. Nothing can go wrong. And Christo Visser was invested in. Christo Visser was the smartest, or the most successful South African investor. So when this guy invested in it, why not you? So I think it was a fascinating story. I mean, I'd fought with Marcus Jooste for years, so I didn't trust that story. So when the story broke, when he announced his resignation,
so your radar was already ringing on Marcus way before the story broke.
Christo Visser, I would speak to Christo Visser before then. He'd say, like, some people on my board don't like you at all. They think you're just out to cause damage. So I said, Christo, are you talking about Marcus? because that guy just doesn't even have the guts to speak to me anymore. I mean, we'd written about how this was in 2011, 6 years before it went bust, how he'd been assessed for taxes based upon the fact that he'd bought the forests in Knysna in his personal capacity and then sold it to Steinhoff and made, I think 200 million was the tax assessment on that. And you were thinking, well, here is this guy who was supposedly never selling any shares in Steinhoff and was earning this small salary every year, and yet he's doing 200 million rand deals. Where's this coming from? So the story wasn't really adding up. And then you look at what Steinhoff bought at the time, and it had pretty much low quality assets, low earnings, low real quality earnings, and that very low tangible net asset value. And I think for a lot of people, it just didn't add up at the time. Then they bought PEP from Christo Visser, and it was like, as one person said to me, that's like when the mafia decides to go straight and buys laundries. So finally they had some real cash. But until then, I think it was a touch and go operation. So I wasn't at all surprised. When the news came that he resigned and there were accounting irregularities, my wife and I said, well, couldn't it happen to a nicer guy?
I mean, it's easy for people to say in hindsight, they knew this or they knew that. But the market didn't really know. No. The fact that Steinhoff was in almost every single portfolio.
Absolutely. And Oliver, these kind of stories. I mean, you can see a few things that don't add up. But people who wrote afterwards, anyone who looked at this for 10 minutes knew it was a scam, that is just not true. You saw things that don't add up, but you didn't know the full extent of the corruption. The fact that there was 106 billion rand in fictitious earnings, nobody knew that. And you could never know that. You can know that what they're telling the market isn't entirely true. You can see fractures in their story, but you'll never have the sense of it being a big global scam. I think the full extent of it only emerged later. And I think the extent of it was shocking. I'm not a conspiracy theorist myself. So when people tell you stories of, this is a massive global scam and this and that, sure, but where's the evidence?
Yes.
It's like I mean, people will tell you stuff and you have to see the evidence for it. So I was shocked when I saw the full extent of what they were doing, what Marcus primarily was doing, and just a small group around him, the kind of the German guys who are now in prison.
Yeah. And I believe there's a follow-up in the making.
Well, I mean, to some extent. So we did the documentary series.
Yes, which was fantastic. I really enjoyed watching that. In fact, any of the staff members here said it was recommended watching.
Recommended watching, mate. Just after Bluey.
If you want to become an auditor, you need to understand it. Watch it.
Yeah, it's been. I mean, that's the extent to which that series kind of captured the imagination was interesting. I've been to a couple of universities where they kind of show it to their accounting students. It wasn't a very technical thing, but I think it distilled the message.
Yes.
And it was done. The production values were really good. It was pretty good. And so after he died, we need to update the book. When I wrote the book Steinheist, the PwC report wasn't out. So it was a huge risk, actually, just to write this book, to publish it, saying there was this massive this fraud at Steinhoff going across the world to Switzerland and drawing together all these strands of the fraud. It wasn't confirmed I had really good sources. I had done a lot of work on it, but the PwC report wasn't out. So I had a couple of moments where I thought, well, what if the auditors come back and say, oh no, this is completely explicable. This is like actually under this.
It's your reputation on the line.
Exactly. So it was a huge risk. But then the PwC report was even more damning than I suppose we had been, and we fought as Financial Mail and Ambabungani to get the full PwC report, which we did finally get late last year, early this year. And it's fascinating to read the interviews with the people involved in it and the extent to which really smart executives of companies do the wrong thing and get, I would say, bullied in a sense. And I think this is a message for all companies. You do that one thing because your boss tells you to, and it leaves you uncomfortable. But from then on, you suck it into it. You almost are covering your tracks right the way in. And there were so many people who I think were unfairly blamed for the Steinhoff case because they did something initially or they turned a blind eye, and then after that they suck it in. Marcus has got you. And I mean, I think of Ben Lachranji, who was the CFO, and Ben, I feel incredibly sorry for Ben in some ways because he wasn't one of the architects. That's what the PwC report shows. But he did do things, for example, where Marcus used on an airplane gave him a tissue, basically, and he'd written this invoice on. He's like, oh, this is what we owed, and it was something like 230 million rand or something, 3.2 billion rand. And he said, oh, just process this. And so Ben took the invoice that Marcus gave him, processed it, and it made a massive swing in Steinhoff's profits that year. It turned a division profitable it wasn't, and was incredible. But so you trust your boss, you trust the guy who's the CEO. He gives you this invoice, says this is what the rebate is, process it. So Ben did that. He processed it. He sent it off and said, we need the invoices for this. And Marcus's German mates sent the invoices, fictitious invoices, obviously, and it went through the accounts. And then the result was Steinhoff publishes financials showing this massive swing in profits. And it's incredible that happens. But that's when your early trigger warnings should tell you this is not, something is not kosher here.
And the follow-up book, what's your angle on that, or you don't want to break cover on it yet?
No, it's just essentially it's the end game. I mean, why he did it, delving more into the interviews, into the PwC report, into exactly that kind of thinking. I always think these stories are really interesting, not so much for what happened. What happened is, this was a fraud, that was a fraud, but why do people get there? How do people first make that first move to break the rules? And how do you get everyone and a whole company that size to follow you in that direction? What causes something to break in people? And that's, I've always found far more interesting. And Marcus used to going to work every single day for more than a decade, knowing that he was fiddling the books, and how you justify that to yourself, I find fascinating. And I did a lot of reading about it. I spoke to some Harvard professors about why people do that. And one of the guys who spoke to a whole lot of them, I mean, he talked about how, the guys would rationalize it to themselves, like, I'm saving jobs, this is a victimless crime. If I let this go through without these extra profit numbers, then people's jobs are on the line, families will suffer, shareholders will suffer. The way you rationalize it to yourself and think you're like Robin Hood of the modern corporate era. The extent of self-delusion and what allows you to go to work every day while doing that kind of stuff is really fascinating.
South Africa has experienced a few corporate scandals over the last few years. Steinhoff's obviously the biggest one.
Yeah.
Are there lessons that we're learning as a country, or do you think those lessons are forgotten?
I mean, I think Tongaat was another one. It was a big one. I mean, that sugar company, they also had fictitious profits. They had, talking of valuing biological assets. They were kind of valuing the cane in the ground at ludicrous sums that wasn't in line with a Lovo or any other sugar company. It was a, they were doing things that were clearly, they were backdating land deals because Tongaat's big asset at the time was land.
Yes.
And I think it speaks to the desperation of where things got. The economy from about 2010, 2011 just went backwards. And I think that there was a lot of hope hinging upon things improving, and they never really did. And it does make you wonder to what extent there are always these kind of dodgy dealings happening, but the economy recovers to some extent, so you don't find it out. But Steinhoff and Tongaat, EOH, a few others hit the wall, and that's why we know about it. So I think, like, to some extent, the extent to which a lot of executives were hoping things would improve, the extent to which they're willing to bend the rules, and I think it's also taken the veil off the way some boards operate. I think the notion that if you're a board of directors or an audit firm, you can prevent these things. That seems to be that's what people believe. But I think that there are, as Christo Visse always says, and I won't do his accents here, but as he always says on things like this, you say I was responsible as the chair, but then what about the internal auditors, the external auditors, all the bankers that looked at these deals, the regulators? There's so many layers. And I think that there are levels of culpability, and people can always look throughout the layers. But then you have the audit firms are really fascinating when you look at things like Wirecard in Germany as well, and the discrepancy between the public perception that auditors must find fraud and the reality that auditors can't really find fraud. It's a very difficult thing to, and it takes an education. It takes lots of education, I think, in terms of bridging that. But I do think in the case of Steinhoff, they had 3 accounting PhDs on the board.
Yes.
And they had an accounting scandal. It's staggering.
It's a hugely qualified, probably the most qualified board on the JSE.
Yeah. If you were going to put together a board of the most qualified people, it would look pretty much like Steinhoff's did. And yet they had this disaster. So it does bring home the realities of the limitations of what a board of directors can actually do when you've got somebody who's a complete rogue fiddling the numbers. I spoke to Steve Boyson, who was the chair of the audit committee, and he was saying, like, well, I'm a non-executive. I'm not working here full time. There are these things that don't add up. The auditors, Deloitte, call me and say, like, we can't reconcile this. And I'll call up Marcus and say, Marcus, just give them the information, man. Like, what can I'm not on this full time. Like, you don't expect to find this massively complicated scam involving vexels and all kinds of stuff that you yourself are not competent to handle on a part-time basis. I think it was bad luck for a lot of the non-executives there to just be on that board. But it did strip away the veil of just how little impact they can have in a board where you have a rogue CEO.
A lot of commonalities with those businesses that have gone through those corporate failures. There's a big ego there that's been able to keep different conversations apart from each other and keep that distance. Do you think non-execs are too distant from the operations? I mean, to some extent, they have to be distant to some extent, because you can't be a non-executive where your role is oversight and strategy. When you are too involved, then you're running the company to some extent, and I think then you blurring the roles, and I think the executives don't like it. You've hired me to run the company, let me run the company. But greater oversight is obviously necessary. But a company like Steinhoff, you have board packs that go like this for each little arm, and you don't have time to go through all of it. And as you know, when you've seen these accounting scandals, it's often not the obvious risk you see that kills the company. It's the one you don't see that's down there. The sort of thing you flip over in a board pack, And I think that's the reality, is that Marcus did a lot of things to make sure that nobody found this. For example, when they suggested having auditors, Deloitte audit the whole company all over the world, the different subsidiaries, he said, no, well, we've got to have the German subsidiary, the German audit firm, auditing the German operation where the fraud happened, who he had far greater influence on and who was a much smaller operation. So there was no cohesive oversight from Deloitte globally. And he did those kind of things to make sure that these pieces never quite aligned. And it's very difficult to detect a scandal in a case like that. I mean, I have, obviously there needs to be accountability for things when things go wrong, but you also, I personally have sympathy with some of those non-executives not seeing this and getting caught in it, because they didn't have the intention to create a fraud that someone like Marcus clearly did. Do you think off the back of these stories, the investigative journalism that you and other organizations have done, do you think corporates are more attuned to that now? Do you think they've changed their tact and are more focused on doing things properly?
I mean, I personally think so. You will know this for sure, but the audit committee chairs and the audit committee members that I speak to said that specifically in the year or two after Tongaat and Steinhoff, that those meetings would drag on for ages. Every small little incremental thing gets completely interrogated to an extent where you would just ignore it before. So I think it has caused a great awareness, and this notion of vulnerability that we are, we just have this impeccable corporate governance because of our very DNA says it. I think that has been comprehensively punctured. So I think the notion that we're invulnerable and we can just gloss over stuff like this. I mean, sure, there are companies where you'll have, board meetings and audit committee meetings lasting 20 minutes. And to some extent, they'll just be lucky a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But if they're very unlucky, they'll run into a Steinhoff and then they'll be completely lacerated.
Yeah. And Rob, what sort of themes are you seeing now in your new role at Currency that you and your team are finding in corporate South Africa? Any themes that stick out for you? Well,
I think the discussion about, you have all these moments of hope that happen. You have like Ramaphosa comes in 2017, finally Zuma is gone, we can get back to growing the country. And then you realize, the problem might not just be one individual, might not just be Jacob Zuma, it might be a larger structural issue. And then you have, so then the ANC loses power. So you have, finally the GNU's in power. We can finally have some real growth in the country. And then you realize the problems are far more systemic than just that. It's kind of the reforms do take longer to permeate, for one thing, and just things take longer. And the level of insidiousness with which corruption has seeped into all parts of our society. The fact that, you can have good leadership at Eskom, and they seem to have really good leadership now. But the fact is there are so many people throughout an organization of 40,000 employees where there is still inefficiencies, where there's still corruption. You look at the prosecuting authority, you can have Shimula Batoy, who really isn't as bad as some people say, but yet you have a denuded prosecutorial services doing too much. And it's very difficult for them to prove many of the things. So I think the level of institutional failure has become far more evident. And it takes more than just removing an individual or removing this particular party right now to break it down. So I think the level of complexity is becoming more clear. And then within that, you have the frustration over sort of the way Black economic empowerment has been implemented and the level of obstacles to growth. And so it's gone from removing individuals to looking at these bigger institutional blockages, of which Black empowerment, as completely necessary and as completely morally legitimate as it was, the way it's been implemented has been terrible. It's led to these massive fronting scandals. It's led to these disasters where real transformation isn't actually happening. So there's that element to it. But then there's also institutional capacity. You have the fact that these government departments are way overstaffed, don't do very much, and things just aren't getting done. And it's frustrating when you have a very competent professional corporate service that does really well, but keeps bumping their head against things they shouldn't. I think when foreign investors and foreign executives I speak to talk about their South African arms, the South African leadership, the people I meet here, they're always super impressed with the level of skill and competence of the private sector leaders. But they still find it difficult to invest in a country where the risk premium is so high, where you had a situation where we were grey-listed, which we should never have been grey-listed for a year and a half. And it's incredible that when we put our minds to this, we're ungrey-listed now, or we will be.
We will be
next
soon.
month. Yeah. I mean, it's fantastic that's happened, but the fact is we should never have been grey-listed in the first place.
It's all things that could have been done.
Exactly. So it's, the country has made a whole history of, going right to the edge of the cliff, leaning over and saying, catch me. And that's what we've done. And, it's the joke's getting old.
And notwithstanding all of that, we still remain South African optimists. Maybe we're the crazy ones, Rob.
Well, I mean, it's part of our culture, right? I mean, we are here, we're born here. And I think one of the things we said at Currency is and this is a view from the executives we speak to, is that it's easier to make a difference in this country.
Yes.
You do something here in this country, you can make a difference. And the people I know who've gone overseas, who work in overseas organizations, they say it's far harder to make an impact. You want what you do in your work to matter. And I think that it's very difficult to do that in the city of London, in New York. You're just a cog and you'll be replaced in a second. But here, I think good people and people with skill and people with competence can make a real difference. And I think that level of satisfaction is massive. It's like, in this country, as poor as it is and as disastrous as so many things are, you can make a difference through all kinds of things, and that's really quite satisfying, as opposed to feeling like you're trudging to work to earn money. I mean, that's all. You need to do that, but that's on the lower level of Maslow's hierarchy.
Rob, you're a wonderful storyteller. I think we could be talking forever around this, but one of the things that you said there has been repeated a number of times in these privateer podcasts where we've had captains of industry, successful entrepreneurs talking, is how they feel that they can make a difference in this country, and how business, private enterprise can make a real difference. And we remain bullish. And I think that's part of the message that we want to get out through Privateers podcast. Rob, it's been fascinating to have you here. I've loved every minute of it. I wish you all the very best with your follow-up book to Steinheist. I can't wait to read it.
Well, I mean, much of it was conceptualized in your basement cellar, which was fantastic.
And I wish you lots of luck with currency. Keep doing the great work. Thank you very much, Rob.
And to you too.